Manx Radio's Update with Beth Espy.
Fastamai, good evening. Welcome to Update, your daily roundup of what's been happening on the Isle of Man today. Coming up in the next half hour, the first day of the government conference has just about come to a close. So what's been said and what has been the reaction, we'll find out in a few moments. More concerns today have been raised about the lack of accommodation on the island for people leaving prison. And with vaccination levels at their lowest in more than a decade, there's a warning about the spread of measles. All that plus we'll keep an eye on what's happening on the roads if there's anything to look out for. And as ever, we welcome your thoughts, comments and questions as well. You can text 166 177 or email studio@manxradio.com. First, let's join Chanel for a roundup of the main news headlines.
Islands Energy Group has confirmed it has a new interim CEO. The company today announced Jo Cox will be leaving her post. Aidan Baglow has taken over as interim group CEO with immediate effect. The Treasury Minister is to give attendees at the Isle of Man Government Conference details of how public finances are to be allocated. That comes as the Chief Minister Alfred Cannon opened the two-day event today. He warned that the Health Department was still overspending by many millions of pounds. And Public Health is reiterating the signs and symptoms of measles as the highly infectious disease continues to spread across areas of England. The warning comes as vaccination levels in England hit their lowest level since 2011. In international news, dozens of members of the Hezbollah militant group have been seriously injured by exploding pages across Lebanon. Members were using the 90s-style handheld devices to communicate. However, it's not clear what caused them to blow up. Rapper Diddy is in court later after being charged with sex trafficking and racketeering. He was arrested by police investigating claims that he hit and abused women for more than a decade. And Coldplay have announced dates for a UK tour next year. The band say they'll play Wembley shows powered entirely by solar, wind and kinetic energy, and gigs in Hull where local residents will get priority tickets. Those are your headlines. News at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Chanel. Now the weather brought to you by Manx Glass and Glazing, and it's going to be dry and sunny this evening. Temperatures still around 15 Celsius with a light easterly breeze. Staying dry overnight, some clear spells at first, but there will be some low cloud likely developing later, so there will be some hill fog. The wind is going to turn to the southeast. It'll become moderate and minimum overnight temperatures will be around 10. And just looking at tomorrow, there will be some of that low cloud around at first, but the day will be dry and bright with lengthy sunny spells. Sunset this evening 7:28, sunrise tomorrow 6:57.
Manx Glass and Glazing don't just do the big jobs. It's easy to repair broken greenhouse glass at Manx Glass and Glazing. For greenhouse glass cut to size, call 674 573.
Simply income protection from Kestrel Insurance. A choice of benefits. Simple underwriting and peace of mind with a regular income for up to 2 years if you're unable to work due to illness or injury. Kestrel Insurance is registered with the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
Carpetland, the carpet specialist with the island's best value carpets in stock, often fitted within a week. Furnitureland, for 3-piece suites, dining and living room furniture, and a selection of amazing beds. Carpetland and Furnitureland, West Street, Ramsey.
Manx Mobility and Onken have it all. Daily living aids, wide-fitting shoes, rise recliners, beds and scooters, including lightweight and airline-approved models. Call in and see how our expert team can make your life easier. Manx Mobility at the top of Summer Hill.
At Bond Fabrics, we're not just a fabric shop. As well as curtains and upholstery and dress and costume fabrics, we've knitting and crocheting wools, made-to-measure curtain and blind service, plus poles and tracks. Visit Strand Street, Douglas, call 611856 or see bondfabrics.im.
You're listening to Update on Manx Radio. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. So, as we've been hearing, the first day of the government conference has come to a close in the past few minutes. The two-day event is taking place at the Comus Hotel, and John Moss has been there and joins us now. So, John, would you just be able to give us an overview of what's been happening today?
Well, I recall a Charlie Brown cartoon in which our eponymous hero was sitting in an exam. The paper in front said, "Explain World War II. Use both sides of paper if necessary." Well, we're just halfway through this year's government annual conference, and we've already discussed the overall picture from the Chief Minister, looked at the travails of travel on and off the island, heard a description of the local economy strategy, that's hospitality and leisure, mulled over artificial intelligence, the UNESCO biosphere, and tomorrow there's much more, including, incidentally, 2 keynote addresses from the Treasury Minister and from the Justice Minister on the small matter of keeping our island safe. The audience today, a melange from the business sector in the main, those who have a stake in a prosperous island operating efficiently. That includes, of course, travel. More of travel in a minute. But first, to start things off, Chief Minister Alfred Cannon on what his administration has done and where it's aiming to get to, including when challenged over that future population of 100,000 concept, saying that figure wasn't the point. It was the idea of improving the skills base, the opportunities leading to growth that would lead in turn to prosperity. There were 3 Q&A sessions, one for Alfred Cannon, a lengthy session for speakers on travel. From the airport, we heard from Gary Cobb, the outgoing in the sense he's leaving the job shortly, airport director. Stuart Peters standing in for all but part of the Q&A for Infrastructure Minister Tim Crookall, who was at a funeral. Mr. Peters read from a prepared speech. He's known for an outspoken turn of phrase. At one stage observed, there seems to be a view on social media that the government can't wait to screw things up, a view which, of course, he disagreed with. Gary Cobb and Steam Packet manager and director Gary Thompson spoke largely extemporaneously on 2 travel hot potatoes. Mr. Cobb on the shortage of air traffic controllers, Mr. Thompson on the Manxman's difficult times at Heysham. You can hear what they said on tomorrow morning's breakfast programme. Don't hold your breath, nothing too extraordinary, things we largely know already. One thing we did learn, the government does put substantial subsidies to keep our important flight connections. The idea of this conference is to install popular confidence that the island's tiller is set on a fair course. But also perhaps what we needed was an admission that mistakes are made, and they are from time to time, and that the politicians are banged to rights, but accept that, and they will do better in future. Pinky promise. Much more conference tomorrow, dear listeners.
John, thank you very much. I'm exhausted after listening to all that. And as John says, you can find out much more at manxradio.com, and there will be more reflections on breakfast from 6 in the morning. 7 minutes past 5. Now, further concerns have been raised about a lack of suitable accommodation for those leaving the Isle of Man prison. At Douglas Courthouse today, the issue was highlighted once again, and our news editor Tessa Hawley was there for Manx Radio. Tessa, tell us what happened in court today then.
So, as our listeners know, this isn't a new issue, but it is one which keeps repeating. This morning, an advocate representing a 28-year-old man asked the Deputy High Bailiff to sentence his client. He's currently being held on remand at the Isle of Man prison for committing 6 offences, which include burglary, possessing a prohibited article and causing damage to property. But despite having an agreed sentencing pathway in place, sentencing didn't go ahead. And that was because the defendant effectively has nowhere to go on his release.
So what was said in court then?
Well, what was said today in discussion about why sentencing wasn't happening arguably turned into a bigger story than the ultimate punishment that this defendant will receive. Deputy High Bailiff Rachel Braidwood told the court she wants to impose a probation order, but isn't willing to do that if the defendant doesn't have an address. She said prison was absolutely not the place for him, but she couldn't and wouldn't proceed with sentencing because he's been identified as a vulnerable person. And despite that vulnerability, she said there was still no accommodation forthcoming, telling the court, "I cannot quite fathom how it's possible that there's nowhere for him to go." The DHB also revealed that the best the defendant had been offered was a sleeping bag and a tent.
So, Tessa, do we know what is going to happen next then?
Well, the court agreed that it was a highly unsatisfactory position to be in, and Deputy High Bailiff Braidwood has delayed sentencing until next week whilst further investigations are made. She's asked for a probation officer to attend that sitting of the court to provide an update, but said anything other than having suitable accommodation in place will just be setting this defendant up to fail. He will next appear in court on the 24th of September.
And really, as we said at the start of this report, it's not the first time we've reported an issue like this, which has, I guess, in effect, held up the judicial system.
It's not. And so, as we always do, we've gone back to the relevant authorities to seek comment on this. We've approached Manx Care, the Department of Home Affairs and the Housing and Communities Board for a response to some of those concerns highlighted in court today. We've also asked them to confirm which area of government it was that offered a tent and sleeping bag to someone described as vulnerable. And we've also asked them to confirm the position in relation to Tremode House, that's the island's Bale hostel, and its current occupancy level. So lots of questions, but no answers yet. We are currently waiting for a response.
Tessa, thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 5:10. Management at the Sound Cafe in Port Erin say the cancellation of the Cregneash bus service has affected them in more ways than one. Now, then you might remember the number 28 route was axed as it was considered to be no longer financially viable, despite some concerns over the impact this would have on tourists. Well, the assistant manager at the cafe there, Emily Thompson, says as well as noticing a gap in the number of people going to the cafe, they've also had some people reject job offers as they have no means of getting to work.
We have a lot of people who walk to the Sound. So they'll walk the coastal route or they'll walk the chasms, and obviously it's quite a hefty walk. They'll get here to have some lunch and then they come and they wait at the bus stop. You've got to go over and say to these people like, look, the bus doesn't come. And a taxi isn't cheap to get here. From Port Erin, it's like £20. So obviously you're forking out quite a bit of money. It's not ideal, especially when you see people with young kids and, kids are going to be tired walking home. And then we have a lot of young staff that work here part-time over summer. It's an absolute nightmare because, you've got people whose parents are having to figure out times. If you're working 12 till 4, there's no other way you can get up, really. I've had to give staff lifts to Cregneash. I've caught them walking up. It's an absolute nightmare. And so it's affected us in more ways than one, really.
I know you mentioned, sometimes people would be waiting at the bus stop and then you or staff have to go out and explain to them that there isn't a bus available. How is the reaction? Because quite often than not, I'm sure, the frustration would show, and it's not directed at you guys, but you are the only ones there that they can kind of project it on.
Yeah. I think a lot of the time it seems like people think it's our fault. You do get people's, initial frustration. And as I said, if it's a hot day, you've walked down, you've got kids, you're not going to be in a brilliant mood when I come out and tell you that the bus isn't coming. We have to call so many taxis. We obviously get a lot of people from Europe and further afield, so there's a bit of a language barrier and we've got to explain that and call a taxi for them, and it works out an absolute nightmare sometimes.
That's Emily Thompson, the assistant manager at the Sound Cafe in Port St Mary. If you thought I said Port Erin before, of course I didn't. She was talking about the axing of the number 28 route bus service and how it's affecting their business. Lots of comment about this on our social media pages if you want to join in. 5:12. Let's turn our attention to business, brought to us by Ramsey Crookall. And today, the island's energy group has confirmed it has a new interim CEO. They said Jo Cox will be leaving her post as CEO to pursue a new opportunity as CEO of a company within a different industry sector. Now, she's been there since 2021. Aidan Baglow, previously managing director of Manx Gas before it rebranded to Isle of Man Energy, which is part of the island's energy group, has taken over as interim group CEO with immediate effect. In a statement to us, the company said he's a highly experienced gas industry professional, having worked in gas operations, project management and technical lead roles for more than 36 years. He joined Isle of Man Energy in 2008 and is based here in the Isle of Man. And Mr Baglow said Jo joined IEG in 2021 and has successfully managed the group through one of the most turbulent times in its history. We wish her well, he says, in her new venture. Now, the stock market report, also brought to us by Ramsey Crookall, tell us that UK and European stocks closed higher, rebounding from a negative session at the start of the week as upcoming central bank meetings remained in focus. The US dollar strengthened following better than expected retail sales data that seemed to support a less aggressive stance by the Federal Reserve when it delivers a much expected interest rate cut. Oil prices edged lower as fears of weaker demand in China weighed on market sentiment, and gold eased slightly as dollar and treasury yields edged higher, while traders positioned themselves for a potential US interest rate cut. That decision, as we know, is expected this week. Looking at the commodities then, gold off 0.69% at $2,564. Brent up 1.04 at $73.73. At the close, the FTSE 100 was up 0.38% at 8,309. And a short time ago, the Dow Jones was trading up 0.38% at 41,781. And the Nasdaq up 0.68% at 17,711.
I'm running late again. Do you know where I put my car keys?
In the fridge.
Where's my phone?
Under the dog basket.
Bye.
You haven't forgotten that we're seeing Ramsey Crookall later?
Oh, no, of course not. 5 p.m, is it?
3:15.
I'll be there.
Life is busy. That's why Ramsey Crookall's team takes time to help you make a mindful investment decision, considering all the options, giving you full control of your financial future. Less stress, more assurance.
Forgot to put my shoes on.
See how we can make your money work for you. Call 717171 or visit ramseycrookall.com. Licensed and regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
Manx Radio Travel, driven by Quayside Tyres and Service Centre.
Well, nothing that we can see to report on the roads. If you spot anything, 166 177, or you can email studio@manxradio.com. The good news today was the works on the Cool Road are all done, so there's no more road closures on there expected. And down at the steam packet and the airport, all looking good, and time as well. If you want the full list of road closures around the island, you can go to the Traffic and Travel Hub at manxradio.com.
Ask how you can spread the cost interest-free at
Quayside.
It is 5:15 now. Public Health is reiterating the signs and symptoms of measles as the highly infectious disease continues to spread across areas of England. Now, this warning on the Isle of Man comes as vaccination levels over in England hit their lowest level since 2011. Well, Siobhan Fletcher joins me now. Siobhan, first of all, what do we know about this?
Yeah, Beth. So NHS England today published its statistics on childhood vaccination coverage from the last year. That data shows that overall coverage amongst children there now stands at 89.4%, with the NHS warning that diseases like measles can spread quickly. No vaccine there met the target needed to ensure diseases cannot be spread amongst young people. Of England's 5-year-olds, 91.9% had received only one dose of the MMR, that's measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, the lowest level since 2010-11. Whilst just 83.9% had received both doses, that's the lowest since about 2009 or 10.
And what do we know about what it's like here in the Isle of Man?
Well, we've asked Public Health for the data it holds for Manx children, and we're awaiting those figures. But what we do know is they are making a concerted effort to amplify the signs and symptoms. The health body is circulating advice on social media and to parents, with letters being sent home from schools across the island as well.
So I guess a good time now to remind people of what those signs and symptoms are and what you should do if you're worried that a family member might have this illness.
So measles usually starts with cold-like symptoms. That's a high temperature, runny or blocked nose, sneezing, a cough, red sores or watery eyes, followed by a non-itchy red-brown rash about 3 to 5 days later, and some people may also get small white spots in their mouth. If you suspect you or a family member has measles, you need to be assessed by a doctor. The advice is you should phone your GP or meds out of hours. You must phone ahead if you suspect measles so that you can be safely seen away from other people to reduce the risk of spreading this infectious disease to others.
Siobhan, thank you very much. And again, as ever, you can find out the more details at manxradio.com. It's coming up to 18 minutes past 5. It's unlikely a target set by Tynwald in July 2021 to register the entire government estate by 2030 is going to be met. Now, this is the belief of the departments tasked with undertaking the exercise, the Department of Infrastructure and Treasury, who've been giving evidence to a committee regarding adverse possession, better known as squatters' rights. Now, they revealed it's currently unclear what percentage of government land is actually registered and whether or not a projected cost of £7.88 million will be enough to complete the work. Ministers Alex Allinson and Tim Crookall were asked whether the 2030 target was unrealistic.
I think it was a target set without doing some of the background work about the complexity of some of the properties, and as Andrew Sidebottom said, the complexity where you've got multiple titles on them, some of which are conflicting, some of which can go back a long period of time. And that's particularly bits of land that have been parcelled off repeatedly, as we do find on the island. I think it's a lot easier to, when you've got, for instance, a big estate that's been built from scratch, and you can figure out exactly which fields it was on. And if you register that in its totality, that's fine. But if those houses have then been sold off to individual people, then it becomes sometimes a lot harder to find out exactly where the demarcation between one and the other is.
Would it be fair to say, though, that if the people of the Isle of Man, as and when they move property and in other circumstances are expected to register their property, that looking at government and what government's managed to achieve thus far, there is an element of the hypocritical in that it's not a good look?
I think it's fair to say it might appear so, but it's certainly not meant to be that way.
Yeah.
It's just something that's not been done over the years, I suppose, and something that needs putting right as soon as possible.
That is the ministers Tim Crookall and Alex Allinson who were talking to that committee about adverse possession. It's coming up to 5:20. A fire safety officer says in most cases young people do not understand the dangers associated with starting fires. Now this comes after Castletown commissioners reported fires in public toilets and at Paulson Park last week. David Dallimore told us there's been a noticeable increase in such incidents during the school holidays, and most times kids don't really understand the repercussions of their actions.
They're curious, or they're wanting to try and find things out, or they're playing with things without realising the full potential of those consequences that can happen.
When you guys do educational courses or speak to kids, what is it that you're telling them?
First of all, we look at fire safety education. We look at fire and what it is, how it started, how we use fire. Because fire can be good as well as bad. We speak about that, and then we speak about the dangers as well. And the consequences to actions, because I think a lot of the time young people do things without realising how big those consequences can be, not just from what the fire causes and the harm to people, but the consequences to them as individuals as well.
It starts off little, but how serious can these little fires be?
Do you know what? Fire always has the potential to cause lots of harm. I believe that majority of times when people set these type of small fires, they don't believe that anything much will happen. But what's shown is, history has shown us over the past that, fire can have devastating consequences. If the fire gets out of control, it really does have the potential to cause serious harm, or death to people. So, the potential is there. It's always there. It's not something that young people should be playing with.
Right. And do we know as young as what age kids are doing this?
It can start at a very young age. A kind of advice, I suppose, for parents or, guardians of children, or, carers, I'd say, just look out for some signs from if they are starting to go and look at fire and have a curiosity with fire. If you find, I don't know, small burn holes in your carpets, on your beds, your furniture, any charred paper, you see any charred paper in sinks or bins, or children, if they're hiding lighters or matches, it might be under the bed or in cupboards. And if you see any unexplained fires in your home, then there's signs to look out for that your child might have a bit of a fascination with fire.
That's good. Some good advice there from Fire Safety Officer David Dallimore. You're listening to Update on Manx Radio, 5:22. I'm joined in the studio now by the sports editor Rob Pritchard. We'll talk more generally about sport in a moment, Rob. But first of all, after something I think that could be described as a period of uncertainty, there's been some announcements about the Commonwealth Games today.
There has indeed. It's been confirmed this afternoon that Commonwealth Games Scotland has received financial backing from the Scottish Government to host a scaled back version of the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2026. So just a bit of a recap of the timeline, as it were, for those who don't know. Originally in 2026, it was due to be the state of Victoria in Australia to hold the event. However, Victoria withdrew in July last year, rising costs being blamed for that. Rumours and reports started to circulate earlier this year on the possibility of a scaled back Games, with Glasgow being rumoured to be a potential host for it, after the CGF had been scrabbling around really to find a potential host for the Games. Well, this is what has been confirmed today and what is being reported today about the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. As it stands, there are expected to be 10 sports across 4 venues. The specific sports that will be involved are to be confirmed, and the budget for the Games is believed to be around £114 million. To put that into perspective of what was going to take place in the state of Victoria in Australia, for Victoria, it's understood that the costs for holding the event over 12 days was expected to exceed $6 billion Australian dollars, and that equates to around £3.13 billion. So that gives you an idea of the scale of finances that would have been involved to host a full-scale event over in Australia. And again, to put it into a bit of context, Glasgow, this time just over 10 years ago, hosted the Commonwealth Games with 17 sports, and that came at a cost believed to be around £543 million, and that was 10 years ago as well. So it gives you, again, a bit of an idea of just the scale of what has to be put into place. Olympics. Among a couple of other things that they are expecting, like we say, there is no specific outline for these games just yet. There's a lot to be worked out, but there's not going to be an athletes' village. It's to be understood, and it's also understood that the opening and closing ceremonies will also be scaled back events, usually quite extravagant, as you would expect. We saw that in Birmingham a couple of years ago as well, but those are expected to be scaled back. Well, there's been various reactions across the respective organisations. So this is Ian Reid. He's the chairman of Commonwealth Games Scotland, and this is what he said today. We have been clear from the outset that our Games concept for Glasgow 2026 aligns with the CGF strategy to make the Games more accessible for future hosts while ensuring that public funds are not required. Glasgow is one of the few cities in the Commonwealth that can deliver on time given its world-class facilities, experienced workforce and strong supply chain. This is a really exciting opportunity, and we will be working hard over the coming days to bring the final pieces of the puzzle together. Well, to add to that, Chris Jenkins, the president of the Commonwealth Games Federation, says, "We have been working with Commonwealth Games Scotland and the Scottish Government for several months and are delighted to hear CGS has received confirmation of support from the Government to enable them to progress with their proposal to host the Games in 2026. At the heart of our discussions has been an investment of £100 million from the CGF and the commitment that Glasgow 2026 would not require financial underwriting from either the Scottish or UK governments. The additional generous contribution of around £2.3 million from Commonwealth Games Australia to the Glasgow concept will further enhance the Games delivery and is a strong sign of the support and excitement for the concept within the wider Commonwealth Games movement. We believe Glasgow 2026 will be an important first step in our commitment to reset and reframe the Commonwealth Games as a co-created, sustainable model that minimises costs, inspires athletes and excites hosts and international federations." And interesting to hear the wording there, a commitment to reset and reframe the Commonwealth Games as a co-created, sustainable model that minimises costs. Is this a suggestion that this could be the sort of thing that we could see going forward on a scaled-back perspective? Only time will tell.
And I'm sure there will be much, much more about this in the coming days, and hopefully we'll be reflecting more on it in Breakfast tomorrow. Very briefly, the other main sport headline today.
Indeed. Well, Cycling Club Isle of Man returned to action over the weekend with 5 riders taking on 2 highly contested meetings in Northumberland. In motorsport, Burrows Engineering, RK Racing is cutting ties with TT competitor Dominic Herbertson, and Toby Cheng and Annalise Meller claimed the top individual silverware as the 2024 Ireland Championships were held over the weekend in badminton.
I tell you what, if there was a medal for the quickest sports report ever, you'd have just won it there, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. That is all from Update this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in and for your company. If you want to listen back, you will soon be able to do so. This programme will be available to download as a podcast from your favourite podcast provider. And again, for much more on all tonight's stories, just go to manxradio.com. Coming up next, it's an Island Life special all about the Lorient Festival. Then Kinners has greatest hits for you from 6. The Folk Show with John Barker is on from 9. And Dave Moore will be here with After Hours from 10. Have a lovely evening, whatever you're up to. Lovely to see that the sun is still shining as the Manxman just pulls into Douglas Harbour here. I'll see you back here at 5 p.m. tomorrow.